Luke chapter 6. It's on page 621 in the Pew Bibles. Luke chapter 6, I'll read verses 1 through 11. And it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first that he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked the ears of corn and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. Certain of the Pharisees said unto them, Why do ye that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath days? Jesus answering them said, Have ye not read so much as this, what David did when himself was an hungered, and they which were with him, how he went into the house of God, and did take and eat the showbread, and gave also to them that were with him, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests alone. And he said unto them, That the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Verse 6, And it came to pass also on another Sabbath, that he entered into the synagogue and taught, and there was a man whose right hand was withered. The scribes and Pharisees watched him whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts. Said to the man which had a withered hand, Rise up and stand forth in the midst. And he arose and stood forth. Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? And looking round about upon them all, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he did so. And his hand was restored, whole as the other. And they were filled with madness, and communed one with another what they might do to Jesus. This here is a gate. It's technically a pet gate. However, you can use it for more than pets sometimes. In the past 10 years of being married, we have used it for other things than just pets. It's good to keep children in or out, depending on the necessity of the place and requirements. One of the farmers I watch on YouTube, he's over in the UK, and he has, at his farm, he's got a bunch of beef cows, and he has gates all around his farm, and specifically around his barn, so that he can open one gate and close another gate, and he can funnel the animals exactly where he needs to go. He's often gotten compliments and questions about why he has so many gates, because he's literally got a gate that opens on top of, he's got like 5 or 6 gates all on top of each other that open and twist and do the right things that he needs them to do. It's a gate. Just a gate. So keep it in your mind. We'll come back to it momentarily. As we look at this text in front of us, the term that is used many times, we've encountered it before, but at those times it wasn't necessarily to look at it or define it and dive into it, but today we have to do so because of the content here. And that term is the word Sabbath. First, we must understand the Sabbath, understanding the Sabbath. The Greek word for Sabbath is Sabbaton. Other times you might hear words referred to it as Shabbat or Sabbath, Sabbaton. All those words are different terms that simply mean cease, rest, complete rest, and desist. Our first introduction to the Sabbath is found in Genesis 2. There it says, Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, and on the 7th day, that would be Saturday, God ended his work which he made, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work which he made. And God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. Later on, the Sabbath is going to be codified into the 10 Commandments as part of the law. Exodus 20, 8 through 11 says, Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor the stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. The fact that the Sabbath is part of the Ten Commandments is where some draw the conclusion that we still need to observe the Sabbath day. If you hear someone say that they are or someone else is a Sabbatarian, that means that they believe that there must be a day of rest. Typically they use the day Sunday, some still hold the Saturday, within the week in keeping with the fourth commandment. Now we can explore that at another time, whether or not that is required by the Ten Commandments still, or if it's simply within our group or our purview in order to just have a day of rest. Not that we can do no work in it, because remember, we've been freed from the law in a sense, and so in some sense, of course, not in all sense, but there's to be a day of rest. The Sabbath day back then was on Saturday, the last day of the week. Sunday was the first day, and the purpose of the Sabbath was, as its name suggests, as it's defined, rest. Cease, desist from doing what you're doing, and rest. Particularly back in those days, work was very hard. Today we work and we are exhausted by our work, but our work today, with the advancements of technology and all the things that have happened, is nothing in compared to what they had to do just to prepare the land, just to provide food for themselves. It was work. You had to work all the time in order to live. And if there wasn't a requirement by God specifically for His people, not that the Gentiles were required to pay attention to it, and not that they necessarily did it, but God required His people to rest, knowing that if they worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and never rested, they would never renew the strength they needed for the work they needed to do. So the law that God instituted was remember the Sabbath. Don't get so caught up in all the things that need to be done and have to be done in order to provide and everything that you forget to just rest. Just sit down and rest. Now the Sabbath day, of course, was more than just to rest, but rather, yes, in it you rested, but that's the day they went to the synagogue. That's the day they went to worship. That's the day they took for their family to worship God. So yes, in their resting, they were doing something in that they worshiped God. It was a day of rest, yes, but it was also a day of rest to point them and remember God. In the passage before us today, we have two sections, two examples of events that took place on the Sabbath day, the day of rest. The religious leaders, Pharisees of that day, had a specific view of the Sabbath. And what we see is how Jesus begins unraveling the Sabbath. Jesus unravels their understanding of the Sabbath first by reaping, winnowing, and eating. Let's read verses 1 through 5 again. And it came to pass, also, on another Sabbath, that he entered, I started in verse 6, verse 1. And it came to pass on the second Sabbath after the first, that he went through the cornfields, and his disciples plucked ears of corn, and did eat, rubbing them in their hands. Certain of the Pharisees said unto them, Why do ye that which is not lawful to do on the Sabbath days? Jesus answering them said, Have ye not so much read, much as this, what David did when he himself was hungered, and they which were with him? How he went into the house of God, and did take and eat the showbread, and gave also to them that were with him, which is not lawful to eat, but for the priests alone. He said unto them that the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Now, upon first glance, we might look at that and say, they're stealing someone's corn? They're going through a field and just walking along like, yeah, I'll take that guy's corn. Great. That's not what they were doing. The law made provision that as you were on a journey, as you were walking to a place, if you became hungry, you happened upon a field, it was not wrong to take a handful of the grain, the food there as you're journeying, to fill your belly. You would be accused of stealing only if you're like, yeah, I'll take a couple ears for later, and I'll take some for tomorrow. That was a problem. But as you're going, just to take a handful of grain and eat the grain to fill you up was not a problem. When the Pharisees accused them of doing something unlawful, they were not talking about the law that Jesus had given, which was what we read before, on the seventh day do no work. But rather, when they accused them of doing something unlawful, what they were talking about was the rules and regulations that they had established to keep people from breaking the actual law. So the illustration of the gate comes into play. So if, for example, it was sinful, it was wrong, according to the Bible, to step off of a platform on Sundays, that would be a sin. Now, what we would do in order to keep from stepping off the platform is just don't step off the platform. Now, what the Pharisees would do is they put up a gate, and they said, don't go past the gate. If you pass the gate, that's a sin, is what they said. Don't pass the gate, then you're not going to step off the platform. Seems to make sense, right? You'll keep from stepping off the platform by not going by the gate. Now, you can easily go over the gate, you can go around the gate, you can open the gate up and go through, depending on what kind of gate it is. But what they said was, instead of, on the Sabbath day, doing no work like God said, they said, okay, we're going to put some gates up so you know exactly what work is on the Sabbath day. And they did that. They put up gates all over the place to help people determine whether they are working or not. According to the Orthodox Union, there are 39 categories, 39 areas of work that were forbidden on the Sabbath day. All of these. You're not to carry, you're not to burn, extinguish, finish, write, erase, cook, wash, sew, tear, not, da la 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 la. It's exhausting just to read the list of 39. Now, Jesus and the disciples could have been accused of numerous infractions with probably about 3 to 5 of these rules. Some have commentated that they broke at least 3 to 5 rules by eating this corn. First, they were winnowing, they were harvesting, they were reaping. So number 16 on the list, reaping. This is the example of this. Under reaping, that was the law. Under all those 39 areas, you had massive categories underneath the categories of all the things that they could not do. So under reaping, you could not cut or pluck any growing thing. Agriculture is, again, one of the many ways in which man shows his dominance over nature. Such activities as plucking a flower, plucking a fruit from a tree came under this heading. The same is true of mowing a lawn. You could not cut the grass. It was also legislated that we do not handle any growing flowers or plants. It is also forbidden to climb a tree or to smell a growing flower. All of this is under reaping. Fruit, which falls from a tree on the Sabbath, may not be used on the same day. So if it falls off the tree, if the apple falls off the tree, you can't pick it up and touch it. You got to wait until Monday before you can touch that. Technically Sunday night at 6 p.m., but whatever. The use of animals as well as plants is forbidden since there is a concern that one might forget and inadvertently pluck a branch to use as a switch to drive the animal. Ridiculous. Here's the 2 problems with the Pharisees. One, they took the gift of God, which was a day of rest, a day in which they could rest from their work and worship God, and they made it a burden by applying all these rules and regulations to it. They made a burden out of it by saying, this is a gate, and 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 this is a gate. Don't go past our gate. Then you're not going to accidentally break the 4th commandment. Second, they took God's law, which said, you rest on the Sabbath day, you sit down and rest on this day, and they said, if you break any one of our rules, our gates, if you go by our gate, you've broken God's law. So they equated their rules, their gates, they equated with God's law. And that's a problem. If the law said, don't step off the platform, then let's help people. That would have been the term they used. We're going to help people not step off the platform by putting up this gate. Then they would say, you walk by that gate, you've sinned. Because that's the rule we've established. You go around it, you open that gate and go through that gate, you have sinned. Now, I want to be clear on this. The problem was not their gate. It was not wrong for a Pharisee to say, I am not going to pick up the fruit that fell from the tree on the Sabbath day because I don't want to work. That was not wrong in and of itself. Gates are fine. The extra rule, the guard from stepping off the platform, is fine. The problem came when they said, you have to abide by my gate. You have to abide by my rule. If you go by my gate, then you're sinning. And that's not at all what God said. God said, rest. And God, in the form of Jesus, is going to clarify this for them. That's what we would term today as legalism. Jesus, why are your disciples doing that? Why are you guys eating on the Sabbath day? That's not how we do things. Notice the title. Thankfully, Jesus, as he says, is the Lord also of the Sabbath. Therefore, he's able to see through their sinfulness. They were sinning by saying, you're breaking the law, when he was not breaking the law. They were sinning, but he wasn't sinning. They're accusing him of sinning when they're actually the ones who were sinning. Figure that out. He responds with the story of David. David and his men are on the run from Saul and the things that they're going to, and they come to the house of God. The priest Abimelech has no food to offer them. They have nothing else to offer them but the showbread that was specifically designed to be used in the house of God, and then when the service was done in the house of God, then that showbread would be eaten by the priest and his family to provide for the priest and his family. But because the men needed it, the law made provision that if they needed it, if they had kept themselves from women for a period of 7 days, I think it was, then they could have it with no repercussions. And so Abimelech gives them the showbread so that they could eat. Now, between verses 4 and 5, we do miss a chunk of dialogue because you noticed probably that it felt kind of choppy. That you read this and it says, which is not lawful to eat but for the priest alone. And he said unto them that the Son of Man is also Lord also of the Sabbath. So it seems kind of choppy and kind of disconcerted. And that's because Luke doesn't record for us all that was said in that time frame. In Matthew 12, got more information about what Jesus said. Verse 5 says, or have ye not read in the law? So after saying this, or have ye not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? In other words, the priests would work on the Sabbath day, but they weren't being blamed for working on the Sabbath day because that was their duty. But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. Verse 7, but if ye had known what this meaneth, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. In other words, they condemned the guiltless. Jesus and his disciples were not guilty. They were not breaking the law. They were not being sinful for eating on the Sabbath day, for reaping on the Sabbath day like they were doing. But the Pharisees were the ones that were sinning by condemning the guiltless. Mark further clarifies that he said this, and he said unto them, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath. Jesus responds and tells us, hey, if you truly understood the purpose of the Sabbath day, that it had been made for man, in order for man to rest, in order for man to have a time to worship God, if you had understood that, it was not meant to be rules. It was not meant to be a burden on man, but rather a freedom for man. Had they realized that God desires to show mercy greater than sacrifice, they would have realized what the disciples and he were doing was not a problem. Because they were with the Lord of the Sabbath. They were with the one who created the Sabbath. They also would have realized that by burdening people with the extra rules, they were not allowing the people to observe the Sabbath. See, when they set up all these gates for the people, they were burdening the people. And by burdening the people, they were making the people work on the Sabbath day so that they made sure they didn't break the gate and go over the gate. So they were actually helping people break the law, in essence. So their help was of no help at all. Jesus, by calling himself the Son of Man, was again claiming that he was God. It's a fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy in Daniel 7. He did this previously when he said, I have the power to forgive sins, or he told the man his sins were forgiven. He did this when he equated himself with the groom last week that was to come. And now he does it by stating, I'm the Son of Man, the Lord, the one who's over, the one who governs the Sabbath, I am him. Now, in verses 6 through 11, is the second way in which he unravels the Pharisees' understanding of the Sabbath through healing, compassion, and love. And it came to pass on another Sabbath that he entered into the synagogue and taught. And there was a man whose right hand was withered. The scribes and Pharisees watched him, whether he would heal on the Sabbath day, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts, and said to the man which had a withered hand, Rise up and stand forth in the midst. And he arose and stood forth. Then said Jesus unto them, I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil? To save life or destroy it? And looking around about them all, he said unto the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he did so. And his hand was restored whole as another. And they were filled with madness, communed one with another what they might do to Jesus. Based on the way this section is laid out for us, it seems pretty clear they knew Jesus was going to be there that day, in that synagogue on that day. And they either knew that this man was going to be there, or they purposely sent that man there to trap Jesus, intentionally setting Jesus up. And it tells us that they were watching Jesus whether he would heal on the Sabbath. That way they would have a reason to accuse him. David Guzik pointed this out in his commentary. They watched Jesus closely, but with no heart of love for him. Here's the thing. They were in the same room as Jesus. They were watching Jesus with their eyes, yet they didn't see Jesus. They were right there, right with Jesus, and they completely missed Jesus. We can be in the same room as Jesus, and he can be on the other side of the world. We can be in the same room as Jesus, and our hearts can be on the other side of the world, as far away as it can be from Jesus. Just because we're close to Jesus doesn't mean we're a part of Jesus. For me, specifically, in preaching, there's a distinct danger that I can take this text that has Jesus all through it. Jesus did this, Jesus did that, Jesus did this, Jesus did that, and completely forget to preach Jesus. I can give you all the knowledge, all the background, all the good stuff, and completely skip over the fact of Jesus. Never getting around to how Jesus, in his interactions with the Pharisee, was trying to get them to see what others around him saw. That he was the Christ, the Messiah that had come for them. Not the Messiah necessarily that they were looking for, but he was the Messiah that they needed. Not only for them, but for the whole world also. The way we could apply this is, well, I go to church. I'm in church. I'm a member of a church. I read my Bible through every year since 1992. I don't smoke, drink, chew, or run with girls who do. I grew up in church. It's all I've ever known. In saying all those things, you're around Jesus. You know Jesus. You've heard of Jesus. You've memorized Jesus. You can quote Jesus better than the preacher can quote Jesus. But in being so close, the danger could be being so close yet so far away. And someday standing before him, only to hear him say, Not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of the Father which is in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? Didn't I quote John 3:16 to my teacher every week? And in thy name have cast out devils, And in thy name done many wonderful works, and then I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. How terrible it would be just to be like the Pharisees. Have Jesus right there, so close you could touch him and completely miss him. I pray that no one here has missed Jesus. But if you have, the hope is he's still available. You can still have Jesus. You got to reach out and take him. So here they stand, waiting to trap him, and Jesus takes the bait. He knew, just as he knew in the last passages, he knew exactly what they were thinking. He even tells us here, I know your thoughts. I know exactly what's going on in your head. I know exactly what you're thinking. I know exactly what you're planning. And he tells the man right here, front and center, in front of everybody. In those days, they would have wrapped around. It's not like they stood in front of everybody. Everybody wrapped around. And so this man's literally standing in the front with his withered hand. And instead of healing him right away, he looks at the Pharisees. It says he looked at them and said, is it lawful on the Sabbath days to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? Again, their laws regarding the Sabbath, they'd come to the conclusion that the only acceptable healing that could be done on the Sabbath day was a life or death emergency. That was it. You couldn't give a medicine, nothing for your cough, nothing for your fever. Only if you're going to die could any interaction take place. Of course, this man's not facing a life or death emergency. Therefore, they would have forbidden anyone from healing him. Any healing that was tried to be done to him, any drink or elixir or potion that was given to him to heal his hand on the Sabbath day was a sin, according to them. They were willing to forego having compassion and love on this man who desperately needed it, of course. With a withered hand, you only have one hand. I don't know if you try to do everything with one hand, but it gets real difficult at times. All in the name of not stepping over, going around, or breaking through the gate they had set up, which was not the law. On the Sabbath day, in 1992, 3 apartments in Israel burned down. While the residents of those apartment buildings asked the rabbi, is it lawful for us to pick up the phone and call the fire department because the apartment's on fire? It was considered a form of work to pick up a phone on the Sabbath day because you made an electrical connection and so work took place and you couldn't start a fire or any of those little things on the Sabbath day. Is it okay for us to pick up the phone, clearly to do something good and call the fire department because there's a fire and prevent the destruction of more apartments? It took the rabbi 30 minutes to make a decision while the fire is ongoing. And so 3 apartments burned down. Jesus says to them, your laws about the Sabbath day say for this man to be healed on the Sabbath is a sin. But I'm telling you as the Lord of the Sabbath that there is no law against doing good on the Sabbath day. It is right and acceptable to do good on the Sabbath day. So they would use their rules and regulations. All these gates that they set up, they did it to such a great degree that even an act of worship to God himself was deemed sin. They were so concerned about Jesus breaking their laws, which meant nothing, that they were willing for this man to live with a withered hand for the rest of his life. Never mind that Jesus can do good and heal him. Never mind that the man clearly needs to be shown compassion and love. Never mind that this man with the withered hand needs it. Never mind that the power of God could be on display before all these people that day. Never mind that God could be brought glory by this act. Josh Tice said it this way, not everybody in the room likes it when God does something. Not everybody in the room likes it when God does something. Mark tells us, verse 10 it says, and looking round about upon them all, he said unto the man. Mark includes the detail, which was from Peter, that he looked around on them with anger. Anger that these Pharisees were so steeped in their religion that they refused to have compassion on a man that desperately needed it. So since they would refuse to help a man in clear need, Jesus himself had the compassion and healed him. Thus, in verse 11, we see, and they were filled with madness and communed with one another what they might do to Jesus. Imagine being so close to Jesus, right there with Jesus, the Lord of the universe, the Lord of the Sabbath, seeing him heal someone, have compassion on him, and your response is anger and a plan to kill him is what it was. The Pharisees were what we would call the original cancel culture. If you've heard that term, cancel culture, canceling people. They were part of religion. See, religion cancels people. That cancel culture remains to this day, and it takes many different forms, many different names, many different ways, many different religions, but it's all cancel culture. If you don't do it the way we do it, you're canceled. You're written off, you're kicked out, you're banished, I can't remember the term for it, but you're gone.
My way or the highway.
Yep. You're dead to me. The point of this passage before us, I don't believe, is to tell us we need to take a Sabbath and we need to rest, though we can understand that from other scriptures. Rather, I believe the point of the passage before us is to help us see that what the Pharisees did was wrong, to help us understand where they went wrong, and then to understand what we should not do so we don't fall into their same footsteps. So number 3, quite simply, the application. Your gates don't apply to others. Only God's gates do. Remember, there's nothing wrong with gates. Gates are wise, according to Proverbs, technically. To have safeguards up is wise in your life. But the problem is when you put a safeguard up, you cannot use your safeguard to force it on someone else and to make someone else live by your safeguard. Another, mercy is better than sacrifice. Compassion is better than conformity. So we spent the last 3 weeks looking at these Pharisees. Over and over they say these words, in my words anyway, that's not how we do things. It's just not how we do things. Which is culminated in them majoring on their laws, not God's law. Culminated in them refusing to allow compassion because that's not how we do things. That's not the law according to us. Culminated in them sinning by plotting the removal of Jesus. Unfortunately for us, it's very easy to fall into the trap of these Pharisees. We put up gates in our lives, we put up gates in our church, we put up gates along the way. When along the way we see someone walk around our gate and we say, how dare you sin in that way? My gate says this. Who cares what your gate says? What's God's gate say? We say, you broke the law when they didn't break the law. You aren't allowed to do that because that's not how we do things. Comes in ways like this. Don't you know that you're not allowed to listen to that, eat that, drink that, go there, be seen with that person, wear that, celebrate this day, enjoy this kind of thing, be with those people, talk to them, help that person? Don't you know that to do any of those things that I physically don't do is sin? Growing up, many times it was displayed like this. Well, that church uses drums and guitars, and our standard is no drums and guitars, so there's no way they can truly be worshiping God. That church uses a different version of the Bible, and we hold to this one option on that front, so there's no way they could be doing anything acceptable to God. The Bible says be modest, so therefore, since my definition of modesty is floor-length jean skirts and dresses, then if you're wearing anything else, you're not being modest. The Bible says don't get drunk. Therefore, since my gate is no alcohol, no going to places that serve alcohol, then if I see you drinking or going to places that serve it, then I believe that you're a drunkard because of that. See, we get so focused on majoring on our minor gates, on our minor things, and so focused on ensuring that we and others don't step around or over our gate or even move our gate sometimes, that we completely miss it. That mercy is greater than sacrifice and compassion is greater than conformity. Talia, please put that down. Showing mercy on those who need mercy is far greater than sacrifice. Having compassion on those who need to be shown compassion is far greater than maintaining the required conformity to the pastor's gate or someone else's gate or this other gate. I intentionally said it a minute ago, the phrase that I heard many times, I don't smoke, drink, or chew and run with girls who do. Occasionally it was said as a joke. More often than not, the statement was actually saying this: I'm superior to those people because I don't do what they do. In other words, goody for you. You sacrifice some things. You don't smoke, drink, chew, or run with girls who do. Great, you sacrifice those things. Cool, no problem. But who have you had mercy on? Who have you shown God's mercy to? Great, you don't conform to this thing. Cool. I'm fine with that. You have gates up in your life. That is great. That is wise. That's perfect. But have you had compassion on someone that maybe doesn't see eye to eye with you? See, the moment we place our gates on someone else, we've placed our gates on the same level of God's law and made them equal, and that is sin. Over and over, the Pharisees said, that's not how we do things. And over, Jesus in essence replied, you're right, that's not how you do things, but the way you do things is wrong, and I've come to show you a better way. I've come to show you the best way. I'm the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath. Follow me. Leave the legalism behind. Embrace the freedom that's going to be found in following me. That's what he says. And to that they said, no. We've seen your opportunity. We've been given your choice to repent. And they said, nope, we're going to kill you. Now, kind of going forward, Jesus is going to take a step back from these interactions with the Pharisees. And it'll come. They're going to continue to pop up. But it's all downhill after that, unfortunately, in many ways. So, your gates are fine. It's good to have gates. I have gates. Put up gates in your life. Be wise so you don't break God's law. But don't force your gates on someone else. Let's pray.